What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back, bringing you another Pokemon card auctions of the week recap. Folks, I got a very well-rounded recap for you. We'll be talking about a couple of amazing Pikachu card sales, including this Black Label McDonald's Pikachu that hit a pretty staggering price. And we'll also be talking about the Pikachu Van Gogh promo card that hit another new record price. Where is the ceiling for this card? I do not know, but I got a lot of auctions here for you, so please stay tuned till the very end. Quick shout out to today's auction recap sponsor. It is CantoShark.com, the ultimate Pokemon card marketplace. The CantoShark marketplace has been restocked with an amazing selection of vintage, modern, Japanese, and sealed product. I, for one, am very fond of their sealed product selection on there. Just so many collection boxes and elite trainer boxes and booster boxes at some really good price points. CantoShark has become one of the most transparent and trustworthy sellers in this hobby. They deal with high-end product every single day, so please go check out what they have. As always, a link to the website will be in the description of this video. Thank you for your support, and if you pick anything up, let me know. All right, folks, auction recap time. Let's jump right into the fire here with a couple of insane BGS 10 Black Label sales. Here we have the Korean Ditto promo. This is a brand new promo. Got the BGS 10 Black Label and sold for $2,025. Up next, we have this Japanese Zekrom EX from Black Bolt that sold as a Black Label for $8,888. And then, folks, check this out. This is a Black Label Japanese McDonald's Pikachu promo card, the Burger Chew, if you will, that sold for a staggering $21,100. Can you believe it? Better believe it. Which brings me to the PSA 10 Pikachu Van Gogh promo card, Pikachu with gray felt hat. Hit a new record PSA 10 price, selling this week for $1,315, and then again for $1,510. It gets even crazier, folks. Here's one that sold for $1,950. Another one sold for $2,040. This is the highest I've seen this card go in auction as a PSA 10. And like I said at the beginning of the video, where is the ceiling for this card? There are tens and tens of thousands of PSA 10 examples that have been graded, with more on the way. Your guess is as good as mine. Up next, we have all three of the Charizard promos from the Charizard UPCs in PSA 10 continue to do exceptionally well. Here's the Charizard V that sold for $510. Here's the Charizard V Max that also sold for $510. And the Charizard V-Star always blows the other two away, selling this week as a PSA 10 for $859. Here is another Charizard that's been doing very well. It's the Charizard V-Max from Shining Fates, sold as a PSA 10 this week for $370. Up next, we have this 2020 Champions Path Gengar promo, sold as a PSA 10 for $1,575. And then on to the XY era, we have a couple of megas here. Here's a Mega Lucario EX from Furious Fist, sold for $1,250. Here's the Mega Gengar EX from Phantom Forces, once again, sold for $3,525. Here's a Mega Diancie Black Star promo that sold for $3,100 this week. Here we have an XY Ancient Origins Mega Gyarados Collection Cosmos Holo card in PSA 10. Boy, that was quite a title. Sold for $7,450. But that's not all, folks. We also saw 4 of the full art Mewtwo cards from XY Breakthrough, all in PSA 10, sold for $10,600. And then we saw one card from XY Evolutions. It was the holographic Mew, the prettiest card in all of Evolutions, sold as a PSA 10 for $610. And I got one more card here before we get into the vintage portion. It's this full art Reshiram from Legendary Treasures, sold as a PSA 10 for $4,800. On to some vintage cards. We have a CGC 10 Pristine First Edition German base set Charizard, or Glurak, if you will, that sold for $15,214 US. And then check out this Jungle Pikachu, doing very well this week, selling as a PSA 10 for $700. Folks, this has been a polarizing card in terms of prices. It was once $1,000, then it was less than $100, and boy, it's shooting back up, getting closer and closer to the $1,000 mark each week. Up next, we have this first edition Rockets Mewtwo from Gym Challenge that sold for an even $3K this week. On to the Neo series, we have this BGS 9.5 first edition Lugia from Neo Genesis sold for $6,300. Along with this PSA 10 First Edition Shining Charizard from Neo Destiny that sold for $18,433. Here, folks, we have a PSA 9 Reverse Holo Mew promo from Southern Islands that sold for $1,700. And I put this on here because you hardly ever see the PSA 10 come by. It is so difficult to get that card in the 10. It's like a 5-figure card at least. Couple of Gold Star cards. Here's a Gold Star Espeon as a PSA 9, sold for $13,200. Here's a PSA 9 Gold Star Pikachu, sold for $10,200. A couple of Level X cards that came by. Here's a Salamence Level X from Arceus, sold for $3,450, while another Charizard G Level X from Supreme Victors came by in a PSA 10, sold for $10,450 this week. A couple of awesome Call of Legends cards. Here's a PSA 10 Entei that sold for $3,703. Here's the Deoxys that sold for $5,788, while the Suicune sold for the most at $7,101 this week. Here we have a PSA 9 Lugia from the set that sold for $2,222, while the Japanese present campaign Lugia sold as a PSA 10 for $12,850. On to a couple of sales from the Fanatics weekly auction block. Here's a first edition Giovanni's Persian in PSA 10, sold for $3,840. A reverse holo Dark Vaporeon from Legendary Collection sold for $5,160, while the reverse holo Venusaur sold for $5,520. From Fossil, we saw this first edition Lapras in PSA 10, one of the lower pop cards from Fossil, sold for $5,640. And then a couple of the Japanese Prism cards that came by in PSA 10. Here's a Venusaur that sold for $6,300. The Blastoise also sold for $6,300, and Charizard always sells for the most, of course, at $10,800. And you always got to appreciate the unique designs on these cards. And then here we have the PSA 10 Pocket Monsters Checklist card that sold for $10,800 as well. And then let's not forget the Mewtwo Prism card that sold for $11,100. Here from Neo Revelation was a first edition Mischievous that sold for $6,600. Here we have a BGS 10 Japanese base set Charizard with the rarity symbol that sold for $8,700. And I think in next week's recap, we'll be seeing a PSA 10 no rarity Japanese base set Charizard come through, so stay tuned for that. That'll be extremely interesting. Up next, we have the SGC 10 first edition base set Blastoise. A Pop 2 card, I guess, in the SGC Pop Report sold for $11,100, along with the CGC 10 Gem Mint First Edition base set Blastoise that also sold for $11,100. Here we have a PSA 9 Gold Star Charizard that sold for $13,800. A PSA 10 First Edition base set Ninetales sold for an even $15,000, along with the First Edition Hitmonchan that sold for $15,600. And then we saw the first edition Shining Gyarados from New Revelation, sold as a PSA 10 for 18,000 big ones this week. And then we saw a PSA 10 Stormfront Charizard sell for $19,200. And then a couple of interesting sales from alt auctions. Here we have a Black Label Mewtwo GX from Hidden Fates, sold for $3,876, along with this Black Label Umbreon Gold Star from Celebrations, sold for $5,171. Here we have a PSA 10 Techno Blastoise card from the Topps Chrome series, sold for $4,333. And then we saw this PSA 10 German First Edition base set Blastoise, sold for $4,620. And then lastly on alt, we saw this Giovanni Scheme Black Star promo that sold for $12,793. And the final three auctions in this week's recap will be Prime cards, folks. Here's the Gengar Prime from Triumphant that sold as a PSA 10 for $7,908. Here's the Umbreon Prime from Undaunted that sold for $8,401. And the auction of the week we're going to have to give to this BGS 10 Pristine Japanese Umbreon Prime 7,200 point promo card that sold for an even $60,000. That's it for this week's recap, folks. Please stay tuned for next week's recap. It's going to blow your mind. We're going to see some things we have never seen before come by an auction. You don't want to miss it. That's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll catch you in my next one.